Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the 86 F's to Give podcast. I'm your host, Al, and I'm so grateful that you have clicked on yet another episode of my podcast to tune into. We are on episode 26, and today I am really excited to talk about the topic we are 86ing. But before we do that, I wanted to introduce a new segment that I'm going to be implementing into the ends of these episodes. So before I do my normal wrap up, I want to do a restock segment because each episode we 86 or we run out of something. I want to also talk about something, and it may relate to the episode, it may not completely relate at all, but I wanted to add something back into our lives since we're letting go of a lot of things around here. I wanted to restock, order for the first time, maybe, just bringing something back into our lives. So today I think it'll kind of relate to the episode, but in other episodes it might just be something completely different that I'm trying to work on bringing into, and I think it'll be a little fun segment because it's hard to completely cut things out a lot of the times without having something to like replace it by. So I feel like this will be a fun little addition. So I hope you all enjoy that. If you have any thoughts on the restock segment, send them in, let me know. Maybe I'll do a little Instagram poll, and people have no idea what I'm talking about unless they listen to the episode. So that'll be super fun. But without further ado, today we are 86ing microaggressions, and I thought this would be a fun way to end the February episodes. This will be the last episode in February. It'll come out the day before the final day of February, which, as we all know, is also Black History Month. And microaggressions tend to be, I think actually in the definition, it's like towards minorities or like ethnic and racial minorities. So I feel like it fits right into talk about this month, and I would be really disappointed in myself if I didn't do an episode at all that kind of related to Black History Month. So I'm glad I thought of this to kind of close up Black History Month with a little episode about microaggressions. And I know that microaggressions aren't only towards Black people, they're towards all people of color, towards women, towards children, towards elderly, towards whatever. And so I know that that's not the only people that can have microaggressions shared towards them or asked to them, but it relates a little bit. All right, so we're gonna call it our Black History Month episode. So happy Black History Month, everyone. And I think it'll be a fun topic to talk about. I think for me specifically, I always like to kind of explain why I want to talk about these topics. For me as a mixed individual, it's really important for me to kind of have these conversations because I have heard so many wild things, through growing up, and even still, like as a 26-year-old, people just say things and they just have like no idea how that would make someone that's a woman, a person of color, a bisexual individual, whatever, a gay person, lesbian, whatever, feel. And that is like, it's really interesting to me that people are just not self-aware in that way sometimes. And obviously, I'm raising my hand here if you're not visually watching this, but we have all said microaggressions, whether we know it or not. And that's part of the definition as well, which we'll get into, is that sometimes they're completely unintentional or just like we're ignorant to them. And that's kind of why I want to talk about it as well, because it's hard to realize you're doing something if you don't get called out or told that you're doing something. So maybe this will be an eye-opening episode for you. I know for me, doing research through on microaggressions when I was planning for this episode, I learned a bunch. I've also done tons of trainings through work about microaggressions and how to identify them, and also how to communicate, like calling your coworkers out when they share, say, or express something that might be a microaggression. So I feel like I'm in a good place to talk about it because not only have I experienced them as a biracial person and a woman, I also have done a lot of trainings and also I probably said several myself. So I feel like we're in a good spot to kind of talk about this today. Obviously, I think it's important to just reflect often on how we speak, how we move through the world, how we exist. And I feel like this is a really good example of something that requires reflection, self-reflection, to even recognize that it's happening. So yeah, another reason why I want to talk about it today is just getting that self-reflection going. I hope somebody takes something away from this. At the very least, you'll learn what a microaggression is, and that's, if you don't already, and that's a win in my book. So let's get kind of started there with the definition. So I Googled the definition, and it is a statement, action, or incident regarded as an instance of indirect, subtle, or unintentional discrimination against members of a marginalized group, such as an ethnic or racial minority. So statement, question, action, and it says it's indirect, subtle, or unintentional. And I think that's like the key word there. Is a lot of times when people say a microaggression, they don't mean it in the way that they're saying it, but it's just like the way we've been raised in society's like perception and like the definitions that society puts on things, or just like the correlations that society makes with like certain attributes and women or certain skills and Black people. To me, it's those moments when someone says something and you like think to yourself, well, what do they really mean by that? Like, what are they really trying to say? And I feel like that's kind of how I identify microaggressions, because when someone says something and they kind of are like, there's like some hidden implications behind what they're saying, that's like typically a microaggression. I wanted to share some examples, like some common examples when you Google like examples of microaggression. The first one that always comes up is I don't see color, which is just like obviously a microaggression, because you should see color and you should like act accordingly. So that's an example. Or calling a woman bossy, or telling someone they need to be more ladylike. Like, what are you trying to say? Like, what is ladylike? Like, what characteristics fall under that? Because there's plenty of men that do things that would maybe be considered ladylike, but I bet you're not telling them to be more ladylike. Like, you know what I mean? Or this is a bad one, complimenting a person of color on their like speaking abilities or their writing skills, or just like how well they speak. And that is like glaringly obvious as to why that would be a microaggression. Oh, this is one I received a lot. Is your hair real? Can I touch your hair? How do you get your hair like that? Literally anything that's like, and obviously those seem like so innocent. I get it. Like, I get the intent behind it, but like asking a Black person if their hair is real, microaggression, right? Calling a Black woman loud. That's also one, like, it's really just like in their culture, or also they've had to be the loudest person in the room to be heard or to be given the respect, and like loud, even like emotionally, physically, like all the things, like, and then asking people, what are you, when you're trying to ask them their race or ethnicity. That is probably like the biggest one, along with the hair things that I have received growing up, and still sometimes to this day, is just people asking, like, what they really mean by that question is, what is your ethnicity? What is your background? What are you, like, what, where's your family from? Like, all that kind of stuff. But they just go in with the what are you? And it's, very interesting. And sometimes I try to be smart and answer back, like, I'm human. What are you? Cause like, what are you asking? But those are some examples. There's like so many more. And I think the hard thing about microaggressions is that like anybody could like make up a new microaggression like as we speak. Like, somebody probably just said something out in the world that like, what is a microaggression that's been said for the first time ever. Like, I think that's why this is such an interesting thing to talk about, because like there's no like hard and fast definition of microaggression or examples of microaggression. It's not like the N word where we know there's like hard boundaries and hard like lines that we don't cross with the N word. But with microaggressions, it's just like so subtle and accidental most of the time, and unintentional most of the time, that like people just really, it's hard to recognize them. It's hard to be like, hold on, that was actually kind of like a microaggression, or like a bit of a backhanded compliment, like that, you know, that statement that someone just said, like it sometimes takes a minute to figure out that it is a microaggression, right? Or you reflect later that day and you're like, that was kind of weird that someone asked me if my hair was real, right? Like, you know, like it's not so glaring. And I think that's like the hard part of microaggressions, and it's just important to keep talking about them and figure out kind of what the common ones, or the things that maybe you believe that would cause you to say a microaggression, and kind of check yourself there, but also being able to like do research and talk to people of color and talk to women, and like it's honestly not that hard to figure out when someone says a microaggression, but there is just no like strict rules or like examples. And I think that's the hardest part, right? Like also like as a man, like you say something and you would be like, oh, that wouldn't bother me if someone said that to me. Well, no shit, you're a white man that hasn't had to like go through so much shit to like get to where you are. Whereas like saying, like calling, if like say like the bossy example, like calling a white man that's like literally the bossy, like he's gonna be like, great, that's what I strive to be, right? And everyone's gonna assume that like expect that from him. Whereas calling a woman bossy, like that has a very, very, very different implication, or just, meaning behind it, right? And so things like that, like is somebody that, a microaggression to me might not be a microaggression to you. Take a shot for every time I said microaggression in this episode so far. But like, you know what I mean? Like it's just hard. And I think that's like the trickiest part about this, is just like, it's an ever changing, learning conversation, and it's something that you just have to constantly stay on top of, because as new like societal norms and beliefs pop up, there's going to be more microaggressions about those things, especially when those beliefs and norms are not like true fully, and so a little bit about my experience with microaggressions. I've talked a little bit about that already, but like I said in the beginning, I'm sure I have said things that were microaggressions, especially growing up when I just like was not smart and didn't really think before we talk as, high schoolers and middle schoolers or whatever. But now I try to be really intentional about thinking before I say things. But I feel more aware of them now than ever, as I mentioned with like the different trainings that I've done and things like that. I'm so sorry if you can hear whatever is happening outside. It's so loud. I cannot imagine somebody would be mowing right now because there's no grass, but that's literally what it sounds like, which is awesome. For me growing up, I think the biggest one, like I said, was the "what are you?" And that would always really upset me, because like no one's asking a white person, "What are you?" Like that's just not happening. Like they're white and you can obviously tell, but like especially as a biracial person, I feel like or like light-skinned people, or just like people that are not like fully black or fully white, like, or fully something, get asked that a lot, because they just look like, it's hard to tell by looking at them. I'm pretty sure my college roommate, before I like met her in person, thought I was Hispanic. And I'm not at all, but I guess like, just through pictures and things, like people can make assumptions, and that's like, obviously people are going to have questions. And I get like grammatically asking, "What are you?" because when I'm going to answer the question, like, what is your ethnicity or racial background, whatever, I'm going to say, "I am blank." Like I understand grammatically, like that makes sense, but there's just a better way to ask that question, aka what is your ethnicity or your racial background? Like it's not that hard to just like say what you really mean, right? Like what are you really asking? Because I could interpret "what are you" so many different ways. I am a sports information director. I am a woman. I am a dog owner. Like, what are you? I'm so many things. I'm fucking awesome. Okay, like, what do you mean? Like, I could say so many answers to that. So ask what you really mean, right? I think that is like the biggest rule of thumb with trying to not say microaggressions. Like, say out what you fully mean. And we'll talk about this in a little bit. But like, say what you mean. Don't imply by using other little words and calling somebody's names and things like that. Like, say what you mean. Then you won't hit a microaggression. Honestly, maybe you still will, but like, it'll be easier to avoid if you were just saying the words you actually mean, even if they're hurtful, right? Also for me growing up, like all the questions about my hair, I used to work at a country club that was mostly like rich white people that attended, and the questions and people touching my hair, like while I'm like turned my back to them and they're just like grabbing my ponytail, people asking me how I fit all my hair in a bun on top of my head, talking about the size of my bun, asking me if I curl my hair every single day, as if like it's impossible for people to have textured curly hair, like just the most bizarre questions. And like it'd be one thing if they were like, "Oh my gosh, your hair is so beautiful, like what products do you use?" Right? Like that's a way of asking that same question, but like getting the answer that you want, but asking a question that's like not offensive, right? Like, but yeah, there was never like compliments thrown in there. It's just like, oh my God, can I touch your hair? Like, your hair's so long for like it being curly, like microaggression. Like, that's a microaggression. You know, like, just what are you trying to say? Like, Black people can't grow their hair? Like, what are you saying? Like, say that, right? Like, so it's just like, yeah, it's just interesting the things that people would say to people, because a lot of us that worked there were not white. Well, it was a nice diverse pool, I would say. But yeah, it's just like so interesting that people, or the things that people would say without realizing that like that it's offensive to ask someone if their hair is real. Like, you're not going and asking white people if their hair is real, and half of them have extensions in their hair. Like, like, I don't know. It's just very, very interesting. So that's kind of my like experience with the microaggressions that I would get asked. And yeah, it's just like, it really was mind boggling, right? Like, it really is like, huh, people really think like that. And then as far as what I've learned, how to like deal with microaggressions and how to like avoid saying microaggressions, right, is first, when someone says something and you think to yourself like, huh, what do they mean by that? Ask them, huh, what do you mean by saying that? What are you actually trying to say by calling someone bossy or a princess? What are you trying to say by complimenting a Black person on how well they speak? What do you mean by that? Like, ask them, because then they have to sit and think about what they mean by that, right? And then it's going to be even harder for them to like say what they actually mean, because it's probably rude and offensive, right? And then they're going to be like, oh, well, like, they're going to get all caught up and be like, well, I don't really mean it like that. Like, I didn't mean it. It's not a bad thing to call people out on like them being rude, even if they don't mean it, right? Like, it's still something they need to be called out for and learn and do better. It's okay to call people out, right? And asking them, what do they mean by that, is like the perfect way, because you're not being rude, right? You're just saying like, like, what are you actually trying to say by saying that? Like, I'm just wondering. And then they have to then think, oh, well, I guess like by calling someone bossy, like I'm saying that like they're being a bitch, right? Like, they would never say that. You know, it's like if people complimented a person of color on how well they speak, or their I don't know, their writing skills or something like that, and you ask them like, hey, what do you mean by that? Like, they would then have to say, oh, well, like most Black people just like, are uneducated and don't have as well of a vocabulary or whatever. And like, that is like the most insane thing to say, because they wouldn't say that, right? Like, they wouldn't go out and say that, but that's what they're saying by the compliment, in air quotes, right? By trying to compliment somebody on like how well they speak, like, that's what you're really saying, right? But they would never say what they actually mean. They're just implying it with a microaggression. And that's what I mean by calling people out and asking them like, hey, what do you actually mean by that? Because then they're going to think and be like, oh, well, I didn't mean it like that. Like, as far as like how to kind of reflect and do better yourself, it's really just reflecting, right? Like, you have to reflect, think about the things you say when somebody calls you out, thanking them for calling you out and educating you, and just apologizing and say like, okay, I'll do better. And like, honestly, getting defensive or like saying, oh, I didn't mean it like that. Like, it doesn't really matter what you meant. You said something that was offensive. And if you said a microaggression that offended a woman, and a woman is the one calling you out, they have the right to say, that's actually offensive. Like, as a female, I'm offended, right? Like, they don't get to say, like, if it's a man that said it, they don't get to say like, oh no, that's not offensive. Like, you actually don't know, because you're not a woman and you haven't gone through the things or had the perceived ideas about you that women do. So you don't get to say if that's a microaggression or not. Same with Black people. That's like, if a Black person says something's racist and they feel, that it was a microaggression, or that somebody said something racist towards them, they're the ones that are allowed to make that call. Like, they're the ones that have gone through generational trauma of racism, right? Like, they're the ones that get to say, hey, that's offensive, because they're the ones that are going through it, and they're the ones that feel that, right? Like, I don't get to tell a gay man that something I said isn't offensive to gay men, right? I'm not a gay man. So like, if somebody says that I said something offensive, I'm going to say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Please educate me. Let's have a conversation about it and I'll do better. Right. So you kind of just have to listen if somebody is calling you out and just be like, oh my gosh, I hear you. I will do better and move on. Right. Apologize and move on. You don't really have any like credit to be defensive, right? Like you just kind of have to like be like, okay, that's not what I meant by that, but I hear how that would be offensive to you. I will do better. That's really all you can do in those moments. And thank them for educating you, because like you should want to be the best version of yourself and you should want to not be saying microaggressions, even if it's accidentally, right? Also, just thinking before you speak is like a good rule of thumb in literally anything, anywhere, any place, anytime. Just like take a beat 1 second before you say something and just think about how that would make someone feel, especially the people in the room, right? Like, is there a Black person in this room that's going to be offended if I say something like this? Is there a woman in this room? Is there a man in this room that's going to be offended if I say something like just like one little hair of a second to think, and then go ahead and say your microaggression. No, I'm just kidding. Then say whatever you're going to say, or maybe don't, because you're like, oh, maybe that would be interpreted wrong if I said that in front of this person, right? And it doesn't have to be like a constant like thinking for 5 minutes before you say a single word. Like obviously, like we're adults and we know what's right and wrong, and for the most part, you know, we can speak freely without offending people if that's our goal, right? But sometimes if you're going to say something that's like, what do I actually mean by that? Probably a microaggression, right? So maybe reframe, say what you actually mean, or just don't say anything at all. That's the best way to go. And so as far as our first ever restock segment, today we are restocking. We're ordering up a nice hefty order of the confidence to call people out. We're ordering up that confidence to say, what do you actually mean by that? After you just called me bossy, what are you actually trying to say? That I'm a bitch? That women shouldn't speak up for themselves? That women shouldn't be in charge? What are you trying to say by that? We're ordering up that confidence to not be afraid to call people out. I feel like, especially as a woman, it's easy to just kind of like be like, okay, and like super non-confrontational, and just like a lot of people in general, people, not just women, are like, don't like to be confrontational. And I wouldn't say like calling people, like there's a way to call people out that's not confrontational. And that's what we're ordering. The confidence and the abilities to call people out in a healthy, productive way. So that's what we're ordering up this week. And I think I want to be really intentional about when I do hear a microaggression or when I do hear something that's rude. Like literally, actually the other day I was working a men's lacrosse game, and one of the players from the other team, not our team, came off the field and said the F slur. And I was in the press box, and it was like, he screamed it. Like the stream probably heard it. I obviously heard it. Everyone in the like press box heard it. And I literally was just like, whoa, we don't do that here. Which like probably wasn't my place, but like no one said anything to him. So, and then his coach was finally like, whatever his name was, watch your mouth, like watch your language. But I was just like, we're not gonna call people that literally anywhere. Also, it's 2025. When I'm pretty sure people were calling people the F slur in like middle school, like 2015. Like, find a better word, find something else to say. Like literally, like do better with your shit talking, your trash talking. Like, really, that's what you're gonna call someone? So, and maybe it wasn't my place, but I just was like, we're actually not gonna call people that word here on this campus while I'm running the show here. So, but yeah, the coach was like, dude, watch your mouth. And I was like grateful that he kind of backed me up there, because whatever. But sometimes you just have to do a quick little call out and be like, we're not gonna speak like that about people. Or, also a lot of times I tell people to, my friends or my coworkers, like to kind of have an accountability partner. Like if I start to talk crap or, vent in a way that's unhealthy or, mean, like call me out. Like, I don't want to do that. I know there's times I need to get things off my chest, but there's still a way to do it where I'm not like talking bad about people in my life. And it's nice to have people that can kind of hold you accountable in that and be like, actually, we're going to maybe pivot in the way we're talking about this person or this experience right now, because we're not doing it in a good way. or just anything, like it's nice to have people to kind of hold you accountable and you can hold them accountable. So that's all the things we're kind of restocking on this week. The confidence to call people out in a healthy, productive way, and, asking for accountability partners in, holding you accountable for the way that you speak about people, if that's something that you're working on, because it's hard to recognize sometimes, or when you get all worked up, it's hard to have that filter, but having people to hold you accountable is huge. So I think those are all of my thoughts on microaggressions. Continue to have these conversations with people, continue to reflect on the things that you say and the beliefs that you have around people and things, because it will help with avoiding saying microaggressions. So continue to 86 those microaggressions out of our society, out of our vocabulary, and out of other people's vocabulary, because I think that's really the biggest thing here, is that like it takes other people to call the microaggressor out for them to realize that they're doing it. So it takes a village here. But yeah, thank you all for tuning into another episode of 86 F's to Give. I hope you enjoyed the first ever restock segment, and just enjoyed the episode in general. If you have any thoughts, as always, please comment them. Leave me a DM, a comment on any of the platforms, whatever, YouTube, subscribe, all the things. Follow us on TikTok and Instagram. Thanks for listening. If no one's told you recently, I love you, I'm proud of you, and you're kicking life's butt. And have a fabulous March. I guess March starts in like a day, so go March. Final month of Q1. We're getting through it. Okay, love you guys. See you in the next one. Bye.